Hello, and thank you for engaging with this virtual training from the Department of Diversity, Equity, and Poverty. Today, we will be covering the sixth component of the Affirming Racial Equity tool, which is R through assessment. It is important to understand that within the larger framework of racial equity within Jefferson County Public Schools, the Affirming Racial Equity, or A.R.E tool, is one of the central resources available to JCPS employees seeking to ensure our schools are actively pursuing racially equitable education for all students. If you have already explored the A.R.E tool and the A.R.E tool guidebook, you will already be aware of the extensive utility of this tool. The A.R.E tool can be leveraged by all school faculty to enhance outcomes for Black and Brown students. It is important to note here that regular utilization of the A.R.E tool, especially in PLCs, supports the JCPS racial equity policy and the future vision for curriculum, instruction, assessment, and pedagogy. Although the JCPS racial equity policy outlines many expectations for the central office and larger district, several expectations are most readily influenced by classroom educators. In regards to diversity in curriculum, instruction, and assessment, there are specific expectations all schools, school leaders, and classroom educators, regardless of content area or grade level, are expected to pursue. In the Department of Diversity, Equity, and Poverty, we strive to ensure that the mission and vision of the district lives in all areas because we believe that in JCPS, racial equity is everyone's concern and should be a commitment made by all. While all components of the A.R.E tool address the racial equity pillar of JCPS, the other two pillars of JCPS are further supported by one half each of the A.R.E tool. Moreover, the A.R.E tool aligns with the ongoing work addressed throughout the JCPS 6 systems. These connections are not exhaustive, but are featured here to showcase the interconnectedness of the work being done within the Department of Diversity, Equity, and Poverty. As previously mentioned, this virtual training is focused on the sixth component of the A.R.E tool, A.R through assessment. If you are still building fluency around the A.R.E tool, this is a timely space to pause and reflect, preferably within your PLC, on the various lesson descriptors listed here. What is A.R through assessment? Open and honest communication with students and families about assessments, their purpose, and their use in the classroom. Ensuring student input, preference, and choice has been incorporated into the design of an assessment. Using assessment as a means of communicating progress towards mastery. Providing feedback that allows a student to be reflective of their progress and to make improvements to their work. This is embedded in the PLC process as described by the JCPS PLC framework. And finally, A.R through assessment is inclusive of students' cultures, races, and other identities, especially as it relates to the wording of word problems. What does A.R through assessment look like? It might turn out as a rubric that is co-designed with students. You might see questions that are written to be valid and reliable. These questions should be reflective of the skills and concepts taught prior to the assessment. We should see PLCs having focused discussions regarding assessment data and trends. And this should look like performance assessments and other assessment options that allow for a wider variety of learners to demonstrate mastery of a concept or skill. What are the do's and don'ts of A.R through assessment? Do solicit student input in the creation of assessments. Do provide time for you and the students to reflect on assessment feedback. And do provide multiple opportunities for revision and/or relearning. Do not use assessments punitively. Do not use the same type of question and/or method each time you assess students. Do not create additional stress for students regarding assessments. And do not assume that failure on a test is solely a reflection of the student's acquired learning. Here is an example of an item that can start to facilitate more affirming racial equity through assessment. So this item comes from the Cult of Pedagogy, and it is a single point rubric. You can see a sample of what that looks like there in the top left-hand corner. And then you can see there's a snip from this resource that tells you a bit more about this item. So The single point rubric, you should absolutely take some time to look more into it, but a couple important things of note. They are typically found to be easier and faster to create, and students find them easier to interpret and look at and understand when they prepare for an assignment, and they leave plenty of room for high quality feedback, and that feedback is so critical when we provide assessments for our students so that they understand their progress, they understand what they're striving toward, and they know exactly what it is that they need to do to improve. Additionally, depending on your preference, assessment needs, and the students you have in your classroom, this is a variation on a limited rubric format. So this is worth hitting the pause button and examining what you see here on the screen, but this version is different from the previous one because the previous one did not allow space for actually pointing out when the student hit a standard. And so in this format, a teacher can pinpoint where the student is on each descriptor, provide feedback, and then that facilitates a more understanding conversation when the student receives this information. So as PLCs are considering how to affirm racial equity through assessment, here are some questions to think about. Number one, how will this component guide our work to improve student learning outcomes while affirming racial identities in our classrooms? How can students show mastery of the identified standard or standards in a variety of ways and with flexibility for true growth and mastery? Third, how can we build assessments that demonstrate student growth rather than assessments that act as punitive measures against student engagement? 4, how can students show mastery of the identified standard or standards in a variety of ways and with flexibility for true growth and mastery? And finally, how specifically does this component of the A.R.E tool support the work of your content area? We thank you for engaging in today's training. As you progress through each step of the PLC framework, there are additional trainings for each component, and they can be found linked underneath each component of the A.R.E tool. You are encouraged to return to them as you need to ensure professional growth and racially equitable education for all students.